Sound speeds, and welcome to the first boom pole review right here on this channel. Kind of fitting that a professional boom operator finally reviews a boom pole after releasing over 300 videos, right? Well, this isn't just any boom pole, this is an Ambient QP-5150. In some ways, Ambient's changed their game, but in other ways, it's the same old comforting Ambient. Why don't we take a look at it? Unlike other Ambient booms with the QP prefix, the Series 5 QP poles have been reimagined as 5-section booms. There's a lot of innovations going on in this thing too, and although I personally have a preference for 4-section booms, I'm a huge advocate for trying out new poles when they hit the market and keeping an open mind. Therefore, I do feel that I can produce a fair and honest review of this boom. So full disclosure, Ambient did send me this 5150 and the cabling option in exchange for a fair review. I do get to keep them following the review, but I do not let those things affect my opinions, so you can expect this to be a fair and honest review. Prior to the Series 5, Ambient did not give series numbers to their previous lines of booms. They were simply named QP, QL, QX, QS, and QXS. Ambient originally started with the Quickpole series, QP and a number after. The number on the Ambient booms can be broken down, whereas the first number is the number of segments, and the rest is either the collapsed length of the pole or length of the longest segment in centimeters. Hey, I know that guy. There were 6 lengths of QP boom originally offered, along with an extension piece that fits over the outside of the boom, turning the 4-section boom into a 5-section boom while still allowing it to collapse all the way. Later, Ambient released the light series, the QL, and then made a few changes to the QL series and gave it a new product code, QX. Then, after they released the QS Premium Pole, or as I refer to it, the Quickpole Superior Boom, they also made changes to the QX line and created the QXS. Over the years, they've also reduced the number of models in each line, so their catalog has shrunk a little bit there. The popularity of the shorter 5-section booms led the QP line to go down to just the 480 and the 4140 along with the 120 extension, and the QX line replaced the 560 and the 570 models with the 565 to make it fit optimally in a Pelican. When the QS series was launched, Ambient decided to go with only the long pole, but customers demanded a short model, so they added the QSM or QS Mini to that series as well. That brings us to now, with the Series 5 being the 5th type of tube construction created by Ambient, hence the name. Oddly though, on Ambient's website, they refer to the QP and QS booms both as Series 4, so I'll do the same in this video. If I were to guess why, it's because the QP tubes were changed around 2011 from a more matte finish to the pole we've designed used as of the time of this video. As mentioned, the Series 4 booms are 4 sections, and the Series 5 booms are 5 sections, and because of this, there are some basic design changes as well. The Series 4 booms measure at 30.2 millimeters in diameter, and each of the 4 segments have a 1.5 millimeter thick wall. In contrast, the Series 5 booms are 34.2 millimeters thick and only have a 1 millimeter thick wall, but the smallest section is thicker than it is on the Series 4 booms, which brings me to my next point. As with the Series 4 booms, the Series 5 booms can also take an internal straight cable, but the shorter Series 5 poles can also take an internal coiled cable if that's your preference. All you have to do is unscrew the tip and either put in a coiled or straight cable, and you can also remove it without soldering, but more on that later. The locks have been redesigned for a better grip, and there's plenty of surface to grab. They're slightly wider than those on a QP pole, but not quite as wide as those on a QS pole. Underneath these knuckles, the compression system has been redesigned as well. The compression ring and retainer pin has been replaced with serrations, allowing you to fit the ring without having to align it to a pin for a proper fit. No longer is there a pin to potentially break or misalign, preventing a proper segment lock. The already innovative soft-side Velcro self-cleaning mechanism has been upgraded to a Teflon sheet with silicone lubricated felt, allowing easier segment movement. Unlike the Series 4 booms, which come in only 2 sizes per line, the Series 5 comes in 6 sizes. That's even one more size than was offered in the QXS series, which is now listed as discontinued on Ambient's website. Carbon fiber tubes, like the ones used to produce boom segments, come in different strengths, and the Series 5 uses a new combination of tube compounds with UHM fiber layering to produce segments, and when combined with the increased diameter, the segments are stiff and responsive, despite each segment being 0.5 millimeter thinner. But how does the flex compare to other Ambient booms? I'm comparing the QS, the superior model of Ambient boom, up against the QP-5150 right now, and only 4 of the 5 sections on the 5150 are out, and that pretty well closely matches the length of the QS. And when they are both settled and pressed completely flat against this table, if you notice, the QS is slightly more stiff than the QP-5150. For our first test, the QP-5150 was completely uncabled, but all my other booms are cabled, so I have to convert this over to be an internal straight cabled boom, and I'll show you how to do that. We're going to start by taking off the rubber piece off the end of the QS or rather QP-5150. And it reveals a threaded piece down here. Now on the flow-through, which is the QP5EST as opposed to the QP-EST or the QP-SCM, whatever nomenclature you want to use in the ambient world, this here is the flow-through part that allows a cable to pass from the outside of the boom onto the inside. And if you notice, if I threaded this into the boom that way, the cable would be sticking out. So what I need to do is I need to take this cable, find the end of it, and start threading it on through into the boom pole. I found the two ends of the QP5EST now, and I do want to point something out. Although the female end is what you would want to run up through the bottom of the boom up to the end of the boom, it does not fit. So what you have to do is start at the other end, the microphone end, and route the cable down through this direction. On the microphone end of the boom pole, you see 3 circles. 1, 2, 3, and then there's a U. Now, the first time you go to take this metal piece off so that you can actually thread the cable through the boom, you need to perhaps use something like an Allen key and stick it through 2 of the circles, leaving the U completely untouched. Now, it was a little bit on the sticky side the first time I did it, but I did pre-loosen it for the sake of this video. When you unscrew the end piece all the way, you'll have this little bitty cap there. And what I ended up doing is actually kind of unscrewing it off as I took it off with my fingers, and that helped it to kind of come off a little bit. Now notice there's only one of these 2 ends that's going to make it all the way down through the boom pole, and you want to keep the female end up there in order to plug into the microphone. So there we go, threading this end down to the end of the boom. When the cable's made it down to the end of the boom pole, notice that you can pull it all the way through. But I don't want you to do that just yet, because what I think you need to do is look at where the threads are here and how they would connect. And then stick this part down through and make sure that it sticks out through the end of the flow through there, and go ahead and attach it into position. I usually recommend people post the cable through this end of the boom pole. That way you can make sure that it doesn't kink on anything and you're not tearing the cable prematurely. Once you posted the cable all the way through this boom, what you need to determine is how much of the cable you want to keep out on the microphone end. And normally what I do is I only keep a little bitty bit out. That way there's not much out there for me to manage, and I can very easily stick this into a little pigtail that I've made that goes into any of my microphones. And this little boot here, if you notice, has a little bit of a lip on there. You stick that on the inside and you slide it in position, and then replace the end onto the end of the boom pole at this point. Once this is screwed in position, you now have a completed end to this boom pole. Now we just move down to the other end, and notice it's fairly incomplete. Well, first thing we're going to do is attach on the rubber bumper to the end again. And to complete the process, on the end of the cable, you have a TA3 connector that goes perfectly into the little adapter that Ambient also gives you with this flow-through setup. Now you can plug this into anything with an XLR connector. Now I have an Ambient QP-4140 against the Ambient QP-5150, and again I have 4 of the 5 segments extended on the 5150. And I want you to notice when they settle, the 5150 is quite a bit stronger than the 4140, and it doesn't bow nearly as much. Sorry about the dog barking in the background, but the sun is setting, so I got to get these tests done before I lose all my light. Sound like a DP now, don't I? Now I want you to notice that now I'm using a QXS5130. versus the QP-5150. Both of these are 5-section boom poles, but on the QP-5150, I only have 4 of the 5 out. But I need all 4, or rather 5, of the sections on the QXS5130 in order to almost go slightly longer, I should say, than the 5150. And when they are completely out and they got the same water bottle on the end of them, notice that the 5150 is slightly stiffer as well. Now, I do want to point out also that the 5150 is straight cabled and the 5130 is internally coiled cabled. So there's a tad bit more weight coming from that thinner cable, but not enough to really completely balk at. Right now in front of me, I have a QP-5150 against a QS inside of a QP-120 extension. And when I get into post, I'll be able to see the length of the boom and see exactly which one is longer. Now, they're both settling down. And while they do so, let me tell you this, on both the QP-4140 and the QS inside of a 120 extension here, I'm using Canary L4E6S cable, not the 4E5C, which is the 4.8 millimeter thick cable. I'm using the 6 millimeter thicker version because I like it inside of a boom better. Now, that may make it a slightly bit heavier than the cable that is native to the 5150, but don't really, freak too much about that because it's just my personal preference. And if you notice, both of them are bowing about the same amount. So I think that this is pretty conclusive that the QP-5150 is quite a bit stiffer than the regular QP4 segment series. I have used the QP-5150 on set and can confirm it's very snappy and goes exactly where you want it to without bowing too much. I also want to add that I only used it in an uncabled configuration with the transmitter on the microphone end of the boom. So it's technically the wrong side of the boom because you'd rather have a counterweight, but I didn't use it in a cabled configuration at all. I used this 21-foot boom pole exclusively on set for 3 days, and I must add, this is too long of a pole to use for everyday booming. The reason I say that is because most of the time you're booming someone maybe 8, maybe even 5 feet away. And if someone's only 5 feet away, why do I need to hold 16 feet of pole in my hands? My rule is, I will try to use a pole when it's extended out at least 2/3 of the way. I find that it balances best in my hands at that distance, and it's not going to be you carrying too much pole in your hands, it's going to be using it effectively. And this pole here, I would say 2/3, maybe plus a foot or two. So 16 feet or more, and this pole is wonderful. Now, I would say you need to get yourself at least 2 lengths of pole, maybe something that's longer like a 17, 18, 21-foot pole like this one, and then maybe something around maybe 10 or 12 feet, maybe up to 14. However, think of it like golf clubs. You don't just have a putter and a driver, do you? You also would probably want to have at least 1 iron. So 3 poles is most ideal, maybe a 10-foot to 12-foot, maybe a 16 to 18, and then have the 21-foot as well. That's going to increase your game tremendously. That said, what do I think of the Series 5 ambient booms? Well, keep in mind that I'm a professional boom operator, I'm an expert on boom poles, and have extensive knowledge of ambient booms. However, I can say that that pole right there is a work of art. It's beautiful. And some of the things I'm about to say could come off as overly critical, and believe me, I am nitpicking the little things because there's nothing wrong with it. No major, no minor issues. This pole would serve you just fine and well. However, I did do some very in-depth testing of it, and I'm going to show you what I found. Let me start by saying that I absolutely love the new locking mechanism. Not having to work with the retainer pin and compression ring to me is a wonderful thing. I don't know how many times I've loaned a boom pole out only to have it come back cross-threaded because somebody did not understand about the compression ring and the retainer pin. This thing here with the serrated edges makes it mindless. The knuckles themselves grab your hands quite well, and I don't think they're overly big or too small either. You can easily grab it with 2 fingers. Too much metal there is going to start to add up and weigh too much. Too little, and it's going to be very hard to actually grab the segment. So I think this is a very ideal balance of that. As for the texture of the segments, it feels kind of like a panoramic pole, but not quite that sharp. If you were to put a Zeppelin on the end of this and then extend it and slide your hand across it, it's going to be uncomfortable / painful depending on how much weight you actually have and how far it's extended. However, I also would recommend not putting this directly up to another boom pole if the knuckles could touch the carbon fiber segments because you could scrape them. But after you use it for a couple of weeks or so, you're going to start to take the curse off of the grip. It's still going to be extremely effective, but not hurt your hands nearly as much anymore. I also love that you can add an internal straight or coiled cable whenever you want to without soldering, provided you have the QP5EST. And if you want to go internal coiled cable, you simply take an Allen key here and here, and you see that little notch there and there, you simply hinge it up, add your right angle in there, and you're good to go. But if you go internal straight cable, I find that hole to be a bit on the small side. If you retract the pole vertically, sometimes that thin cable can't escape quick enough and it bunches up. Just like it does if you retract a pole horizontally in a humid environment. Sometimes it's just enough sticky on the inside to bunch up and prevent it from coming out of that hole in a horizontal position. That, by the way, is why I always use full thickness star quad on my boom poles. I did unscrew both the TA3 and the XLR connectors and gave them a good look. The solder points are very cleanly done, and both connectors have more than adequate enough strain relief. The only negative I would say, and it's just a personal preference thing, is that the cable is not star quad. The XLR connector is a Neutrik NCFXX, and the TA3 is a Reen. The adapter is also a Neutrik, and they're made pretty well. I mean, if I were to yank at this right now, you're listening to the microphone. I mean, I'm yanking on this thing and not being very gentle at all. You can hear that it's actually doing a pretty good job. I mean, you didn't hear any bops or anything in there. No pops, no crinkles, no anything. It's pretty good. Just like the flow through on the QX/QXS boom poles, when you have this screwed on tight to the base of the Series 5 poles, it does wobble ever so slightly. Not quite that much because it's not connected, but it does wobble ever so slightly, and personally, I don't like that. I like the QAEST QPSCM on the base of the Series 4 booms much better. This thing is solid, doesn't wobble at all, and the hole is plenty big. The Series 5 segments feel great on the hands, but I will point out that there's slightly more transfer noise than there is on the Series 4 booms. However, I did do a test just to give you an idea of how much there is, and this is a worst case scenario, a microphone with the recorder on the end of it directly touching the boom poles themselves. Listen to this. Even with that unfair test, you can see how little transmission noise makes it through an ambient boom. They're very resilient to that sort of thing. And if you cable it, then the thin cable will transmit slightly more transmission noise than an L4E6S star quad will. But then that's a little minor thing also because the pole does a great job of withstanding and resisting a lot of that. The little plug on the inside of the tip prevents the air from escaping too quickly unless you're using a QP-5150 flow-through on the bottom. And it's very similar to the way that it works on a Panoramic pole, but on a Panoramic, you can kind of control the amount of air and the speed of release by unlocking the segment more. But with the Ambients, it comes out just fine, and it's not going to just collapse quickly or spring up and down. It just goes out automatically. And with the slightest little bitty lock, like right now it's completely unlocked, watch this. The slightest little bitty lock, and now it's not going anywhere. It's locked with less than a quarter of a turn. One thing I'm not overly thrilled about on the Series 5 boom is that this piece right here that you would remove to put in your cable is not black. Black needs to be at the end of a boom pole, especially on the microphone end for reflection purposes. Yes, I'm aware that on the Series 4 booms it's not black either, but there's no reason for it not to be on the Series 5. Ambient, could you perhaps change that and make that a black piece? The segments feel very strong to my hands. Now, if I had to go full stick with a heavy Zeppelin and a dead cat on the end of it, I would trust this pole to not break if I were going full stick, even though you're supposed to leave a little bit of each segment in there. I wouldn't trust other booms with that, but with this pole I would, but I don't recommend doing that as a rule. In closing, I love what Ambient did with the Series 5 booms. Everything from the new locking mechanism to the retrofitting cable ability is completely wonderful. I do wish that was black though. However, every manufacturer prioritizes certain things. No one boom fits all. And while I love this, you might not. Now, am I going to switch over from my Series 4 QS poles? No, because I like the 4 segments. However, when I need more than 17.5 or 18 feet, I will be switching out and no longer using my QP-120 with a QS inside, and I will be using the QP-5150. If the Series 4 booms were not 4 segments, they were 5, and I were starting over, by all means, I'd get the Series 5 any day. Now keep in mind 4-segment booms are my preference as of right now, and who knows, I could change in the future, but I've been using 4-segment booms for over a decade now and they're very comfortable to me, but don't let my opinion become yours. The Series 5 booms are indeed lighter than the Series 4 booms, and you can see on the screen right now the different models of Series 5 poles in comparison to the Series 4 poles, and you can see how long they are when they're collapsed and when they're extended as well. I put a link to Ambient's repair and maintenance document in the description below, and I also have a video that will appear at the end of this video if you'd like to see how I do maintenance on Ambient booms. If you'd like to buy an Ambient boom, there's also links down in the description below. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Soundspeeds. Be sure to tune in the future for more product reviews, deep dives on those products, and sound advice. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.